Good evening, guys. It's Monday night. It's 7 o'clock, and we're experimenting with a new format on the show. Kind of any questions answered, ask BG anything style format. Thanks to everyone who's joined. This is going out live right now, so thanks very much indeed to everyone who's joined. I can see a few of you guys in the chat. I can see Marcus, Jack, Mr. Kong, Mr. Boxing Today. Shout out Mr. Boxing Today. And I can see Mikey as well. And I can see JG and Louis and Terry and Truth Hurts. So thanks a lot to everyone who's joining. It's 2 a.m. in Singapore where Jack Perro is. So thanks for joining us, Jack. More people joining now. Terry, B, Nick, Toss, Dean, Jonathan, Wallpaper, Flembot. So yeah. Concept of this show is kind of going to be doing what it says on the tin. So I put up some questions earlier on my social media. I'll put it up on my Facebook. There's a link to add me on my Facebook in the section below, in the description box. And I'll also in future do it on my Twitter as well. You can follow me on Twitter at Boxing Gossip. But yeah, what I did is I put up a link saying any questions answered, and people sent in a few questions, and I thought what I'd do is I'd rattle through them in a kind of one-by-one format here live, and then if people in the chat had any questions afterwards, I could go to those and do them after I've answered the questions that have been pre-prepared and pre-sent in. So yeah, that's the format for the show. I guess it's not the most complex format, so no point in overdoing the explanation, and you guys have seen that done elsewhere on numerous other boxing channels, etc. So we're not reinventing the wheel here, but yeah, thought it was a good way of getting some interaction going. So going to start with the questions that have been prepared and sent in to me on my social media, and yeah, let me start by rattling through them, and then if there's any more in the chat afterwards, we'll go to that. So throughout this video, I am going to be referring to my mobile phone a good bit because that's where I've got a note of all the questions that have come up. So let's get things rolling. David Wayman says, "Are we living in another golden era?" And for me, the answers to that, and I had a big think about that before coming on live. But for me, the answer to are we living in another golden era? Unfortunately, not yet. I think there's become a golden era, particularly in the heavyweight division. But I think right here, right now, I don't think we can say we're in a golden era just yet. If I think of golden eras within boxing, I'm thinking the Muhammad Ali heavyweight era, where you had Ali, Fraser, Foreman, Ray Leonard, Hagler, Hearns, that kind of era, that kind of setup. So yeah, if I'm, comparing it to that, are we living in a golden era? Probably not. There would have been potential to have had if Floyd and Manny had maybe fought when they were both at their absolute peaks, and maybe he had a trilogy with the first fight going one way and the second fight going another way. That's a potential that could have taken the sport to a new level. I guess if we look at it now in the heavyweight division, huge names in the division. You've got Vladimir Klitschko there or thereabouts, Fury, obviously, Anthony Joshua. There's the names there and the potential for it to become a golden era in the heavyweight division. But no, are we living in a golden era just yet? I don't see it just yet, because I think a golden era is often defined by the rivalries. And I think if you look at the golden eras in boxing, I think traditionally that's when you've had 3 or 4 fighters in the same division or in similar divisions going up against each other several times, and having a real firm debate in the ring as to who the best in their respective division is. So yeah, there's a lot of potential, but we're not in a golden era yet. Hope that answers your question, David. Shout out to everyone who's joined, by the way. I can see more people have joined in the chat. I'm going to rattle through questions that have been sent in to me first on social media, and then I'll come to the chat for questions after that. But if you are watching live, please take the time to hit the thumbs up button, definitely. Jay says, what do you think of Kessler coming back and the potential third fight between him and Frost? Well, since I got sent that question, I did a video on that, which is up on the channel. So please do feel free to check that out if you want in-depth thoughts. But, you know, in a brief nutshell, I'll say that I don't think Frost is going to fight again. But if he were to fight again, I think Kessler would be a sensible fight for him. You know, Kessler's been out of the ring. Kessler's older. Kessler's been inactive. A lot of the same doubts about Mikhail Kessler. You know, sorry, a lot of the same doubts you'd have about Carl Frost and a Frost comeback are shared by Mikhail Kessler, and it would be a very, very good fight. So, you know, if that fight, if Frost were to come back, I suspect Kessler would be an opponent that he's looking at. But on the balance of probability, I'm going to go with Frost staying in retirement. Kev says, who is the most disgraceful ducker in the sport of boxing? That's a very, very, very good question. Who is the most disgraceful ducker in the sport of boxing? I'll tell you what, let's get the chat involved to answer that. I appreciate the chat probably 20 seconds behind me going live. But that's a good question. Who are you guys saying is the most disgraceful ducker currently active in the sport of boxing? You know, perhaps that will give me some inspiration to answer that question. We're up to 70 people, give or take, watching live now. So, yeah, hopefully we should get some good answers to that question from Kev there. Just having a look into the chat, I can see more and more people are joining. The first three people have all said Wilder. Terry said Andre Ward. Wilder's certainly being very, very, very carefully managed. A lot of people are saying Canelo. Got 6 votes for Wilder, 2 for Canelo, 1 for Ward. 2 for Eubank, another for Canelo, another for Canelo. So there you go. That was a very, very brief snapshot there, guys. But Canelo and Wilder seem to be the most popular choices for who is the most disgraceful ducker in the sport of boxing. Do you know what my opinion on that is? I think Wilder, I actually give some credit to. Not because of the level of opposition, but because let's not forget, you know, this isn't in the history books. This isn't if you look it up on BoxRec. But Wilder, to be fair to him, did travel to Russia to take on Alexander Povetkin, who's a very, very, very top-class heavyweight, as you guys know, in his own backyard. And to do that, you know, I know he was kind of, you know, Povetkin was the mandatory, or it was an enforced fight, and I know Povetkin won the purse bid. So I'm not saying Wilder had too much choice in it, but he was there. He was ready to take that fight. And I've got to give him some respect from that. Look, Wilder's resume is terrible. Don't get me wrong. But has he actually ducked these guys? You know, that is the question. Wilder hasn't been in the big fights, but has he actively ducked them? And that's what I'm unclear about. Sure, he's been in a position where he could have taken mandatories against slightly tougher opposition, but I'm not sure the big fights, you know, the Joshua fight, the Fury fight, the Vladimir fight, I'm not 100% sure those fights have actually been there for Wilder to accept or reject, and he's rejected them. As for Canelo, is Canelo a duck? Difficult question. I mean, at one stage, he did appear to duck Triple G. But he took on Floyd Mayweather. Now, I appreciate Floyd Mayweather is not a scary fighter. You know, Floyd humiliates you and beats you on points. He doesn't hammer you and batter you in submission. So I think it's a different kind of thing. But, yeah, Canelo, if you look at how young he is, he's actually got a fairly deep resume. You look at the amount of names he's been in with: Floyd, Cotto, Lara, Trout. You know, I'm sure there's more names than that. I guess the Golovkin thing is a, you know, the Golovkin thing is a black mark over Canelo at present. So that's a real hard question. You know, it's a real hard question. You know, the consensus there seems Canelo and Deontay Wilder, but I'm not going to go out on a limb and call either of them massive ducks. So yeah, perhaps that's something that we need to think longer and harder about. Another question from Kev, and we'll put this one to the chat as well. So to everyone who's joined in the chat, by the way, I'm going through questions on social media before I go down to the chat. Who is the most underrated fighter in the sport? That is a question from Kev. So give me your thoughts on that. Who is the most underrated fighter in the sport? Do you know, I'm not saying he's the most underrated fighter in the sport, but someone who I do think is underrated is Vladimir Klitschko. 10 years of dominance. Wasn't the strongest area of the heavyweight division, but he beat guys like David Haye, Pulev, Povetkin. He beat them with ease. You know, I give Vladimir Klitschko a shout out for actually being underrated. A lot of people saying Tony Bellew and Tyrone Nurse. I do think those are both, you know, fair shouts. People saying Usyk and Amir Khan. Got to admit, I think Usyk's very highly rated, rightly so. Terry Flanagan, do you know what? Like Flanagan, he may turn out to be underrated, but at present, I don't think he's beaten the level of opposition. And same really regarding Lee Selby. You know, Lee Selby's a very, very good fighter, but he hasn't really beaten the level of opposition. Yeah. James O'Hara says Linares, he deserves to be a pay-per-view fighter. Roughmus says Terry Flanagan. Nick Green says Lomachenko. Some people don't realise how stratospherically out of this world he is. Triple D has a good shout. Stevenson. I agree with Stevenson. Yeah, Stevenson's a very underrated fighter. Mate says Derek Rossi. Well, we'll see how underrated he is against Luis Ortiz. James says Danny Garcia doesn't get the credit he deserves. Yeah, I do agree with that. Some real good shouts there. I like Vladimir Klitschko. I like Danny Garcia. I like Adonis Stevenson. I think those are all real good shouts. Mikey says Badu Jack. Yeah, that's another one. He's not a stylish fighter. You know, he's not a flash fighter. So he's another one potentially you'd want to consider throwing into the mix of being underrated there. So yeah, a few names for you. Gavin says, what are the attributes that make up a fighter? For me, that's a very difficult question to answer because if you look at a fighter like Erislandy Lara and then you compare it to a fighter like Roy Jones Jr., then you compare it to a fighter like Bernard Hopkins, very, very, very different attributes. You know, there isn't the makeup to a perfect fighter. What I will say is every man who steps in the ring has got the balls to take, you know, a punch in the face and, you know, accept that that's going to happen. And, you know, everyone has the, you know, to be a successful fighter, everyone has the strength, both mentally and physically, to be, you know, hurt, to be hit, and to keep fighting and to fight on. So for me, you know, I don't think you can neatly sum up the attributes that make up a fighter because I think it varies too much. But I think what all of them have in common is a desire to fight, a desire to win, and a strength of character and a strength of heart to get hit and to you know, to carry on fighting. Chris says, have you seen anything of Tyson's brother, Tommy Fury? And if so, do you think he will make the transition into the pro ranks in the future? I've seen photos of him. He looks like a ridiculously big lad. I think he's 15 or 16 years old, and you know he's already built like a brick house. He's definitely got a far more muscular physique than Tyson and Hughie Fury. You know, he's a lot more ripped out, a lot bigger muscles. He looks like he lifts a lot of weights. I'm sure he's going to be a giant when he fully grows into himself. I haven't personally seen him boxing. I hear he's done well in the amateurs and that sort of thing. So I guess we'll have to see how he makes that transition before I can, you know, really talk about him, how he's going to make it in the pro ranks, because I just haven't seen enough of him or any of him fighting. Luke says, what are your top 5 boxing YouTube channels? Number 1 for me is my man Ultratech Sports. I think he does the best content on YouTube for boxing fans. If anyone's watching this who hasn't checked him out, Ultratech Sports, give him a look. Huge fan. You know, I'm trying to think which ones I watch the most because I'm a fan of so many boxing YouTube channels. At the minute, I'm watching a lot of The Boxing Voice. Don't always agree with them, but you know, when you're stuck in the office at work and they do a nice 3 or 4 hour show talking all things boxing, yeah, that certainly gets me through the day. IFL TV, very, very good coverage. Obviously, it's interview coverage and that sort of thing. And then there's all sorts of good ones. What's Mr. Boxing Today for heavyweight coverage, Dwyer for gambling, Hatman, Wingy. You know, I tune into all of those sort of guys for boxing news. Loads of really, really, really good channels, and a lot of them, I used to listen to before I started up my own channel. So shout out to everyone out there who's doing their thing. Lee has said, will we see a non-matchroom fighter in a UK pay-per-view this year? And that's a very, very good question. Will we see a non-matchroom fighter in a UK pay-per-view this year? I'm going to presume, for the purposes of this question, that we are talking about... I'm going to presume we're talking about boxers headlining a pay-per-view, because obviously if Anthony Joshua fights Deontay Wilder, Deontay Wilder would be in a pay-per-view, but I'm gonna presume you're talking about the main name. So let's go with Chris Eubank Jr. He's already been on pay-per-view this year, and whilst I understand that he's going to have to up a name in order to to feature in another pay-per-view and fight a better level of opponent than he did last time, I don't think that's out of the question. And I think the Eubanks will be very keen to keep themselves on pay-per-view, having started that off. It's not impossible if you had Billy Joe Saunders Golovkin on Box Nation, or the return of Tyson Fury on Box Nation. It's not impossible that they would try and do some sort of pay-per-view night. So on balance probability, I would say yes, we will see a non-matchroom fighter in the UK on pay-per-view this year. I think that people from all over the world, competitors to Sky, are seeing the huge success Eddie Hearn and Matchroom are having with that pay-per-view model. Obviously, the Bellew Hay numbers were ridiculous, and that's going to inspire more and more people to throw their hat into the ring and to make the big fights. Chris Woodward says, will Eubank and Bellew fight at a catchweight? No, I don't believe they will. I think I think I saw someone put Hatman in the chat. I think Bellew's going to stay at heavyweight. That's my guess. I got a question saying, what are my top 5 welterweights? It's a difficult question. For the purposes of this question, I'm going to assume that Tim Bradley is retired because he hasn't fought for a year, and I don't believe he's active. Don't believe he's got a fight lined up. I'm also going to presume Mayweather stays retired. For me, you've got to have, I think the top 2 are very easy. I think number 1 is Manny Pacquiao. I think number 2 is Keith Thurman. This is based on resume. I think number 3 is Kell Brook. I think you've then got 4 welterweights who are all in with a start of being 4 and 5, which I'm going in no particular order. Garcia, Errol Spence, Amir Khan, and Sean Porter. I'd probably rule out Sean Porter based on the fact that I think his best wins are Malignaggi and Devin Alexander, I think. Garcia. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. I'd need to sit down and work it out with a pen and paper. But yeah, for me, I'm going Pacquiao 1, Thurman 2, Brook 3, and then 2 of those 4, 4 and 5. If I was doing it based on ability, it would probably be a different look. I certainly wouldn't have Amir Khan in the top 5. I believe he's too frail around the chin. Probably wouldn't have Sean Porter in the top 5 based on the fact that I think he's too susceptible to our boxing style. But there you go. Chris Hoskins, is Chris Eubank Jr. a fraud? I think Chris Eubank Jr. is 90% hype. I think the 10% of Chris Eubank Jr. that does actually exist is a very, very good fighter, a very entertaining fighter, a very fit man, a very tough man, and a very, very big talent. It depends what you mean. Is he a fraud? Is he a fraud as a fighter? No. Is he a fraud as a British champion? No. Is he a fraud as a European champion? No. But is he a fraud as a world champion? Is he a fraud as a puncher? And is he a fraud as a guy who's going to run through Triple G? At this stage, yes. Obviously, should Chris Eubank Jr. go out and achieve great things, we may have to review that answer. Daniel, should Anthony Joshua lose to Klitschko, what happens to his credibility? Pay-per-view buys, sponsorships, will the fans turn their backs on him? I can see this fight turning out like Wlad versus Pulev, with AJ being Pulev. So I guess the question is essentially, what happens to Anthony Joshua if he loses this fight? The answer to that is, firstly, it depends on the nature of the loss. If Joshua and Klitschko go a 12-round war and Klitschko wins by 7 rounds to 5, maybe they'll do a rematch in 6 months' time or 9 months' time with a view that Klitschko's getting older by the day. Realistically, I think this fight ends in knockout. They're two huge punchers. They're two guys where there are at least reasons to question their punch resistance and their durability. And I think realistically, it's going to end in knockout. So, bearing in mind the questions asking what happens if Joshua loses, I'm going to suggest that if Joshua loses, I think it's more likely he gets knocked out. And if he gets knocked out, that'll be, I guess Eddie Hearn has 2 examples in Audley Harrison and David Price, who are former Olympians, who are both billed as, unstoppable forces. And he's got 2 examples of how the rebuild went wrong that he can possibly use to make it third time lucky. I believe that Joshua, in terms of his name, in terms of his brand, in terms of his image, has already surpassed Price versus Harrison. He's already a world champion. And to be frank, I believe he's a far superior fighter to both of them. So should he get stopped and should he need to come again, I think the chances of him doing that successfully are actually a lot higher than the chances of Price versus Price or Harrison. I do think we'll see him drop down levels. It may have to be that they do a return fight on a fight that isn't on pay-per-view. And I guess we will see Eddie Hearn try and match him against more domestic heavyweights. You could see the likes of Dillian White getting a rematch, potentially a Derek Chisora fight. Eddie Hearn can build these domestic matchups and kind of drop Joshua down a level or 2, kind of drop him out of the world top 10, kind of put him in fights where he's going to be, more of a favourite rather than throwing him straight in. I think they'll be mindful of what happened to David Price, where he took a second fight straight off the bat against Tony Thompson and, was really psychologically ruined for the rest of his career by back-to-back defeats against Tony Thompson. So, yeah, I don't think they'll go straight back into a rematch with Wlad if Joshua's knocked out. As I say, if it goes to points in a great fight, in a close fight, I think it's very, very different. But I suspect we'll see Joshua drop down a level. I suspect we'll see him not on pay-per-view for one fight. And I expect that they'll do a slow but gradual rebuild. Rob has asked, will Joshua's fans stand by him if he loses to Wlad, or will they turn against him? Good question. The majority, I think, will turn against him. Why? I think casual fans, and Joshua's fans are mainly casual fans in my experience. That's not to say hardcore fans don't like Joshua, but I think the majority of AJ fans are casuals. I think casual fans, and just like Harrison, just like Price, when those guys have lost, we've seen their support depart. We've seen other fighters get the hype. And there's so many undefeated heavyweight prospects out there at present. Guys like Hughie Fury, guys like Daniel Dubois, guys like Lawrence Sokoli. I know he's campaigning at cruiserweight for the time. But do you know what I mean? It won't take a long time for those casual fans to assign themselves to the next big thing. May even be Joe Joyce turning over and going pro. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. Of course, a portion of Joshua fans will stand by him. He's come across at times as a likable character. He's built a large fan base. He's become a massive celebrity. But if he gets horribly knocked out, that's going to be an image that sticks with people. And I think the air of invincibility that currently surrounds Joshua will potentially be lost forever. And I think that's a big attraction to some of the casual fans out there. A lot of these Joshua fans, and no offense if you're a hardcore fan who's, thinks Joshua is the best thing since sliced bread, you're entitled to that opinion. What I'm saying is a lot of the casual fans who are new to boxing because of Anthony Joshua, they probably don't remember, and they probably weren't watching the sport necessarily when Audley Harrison was getting stopped and when David Price was getting stopped. And I think, those kind of fans can be quite fickle. J Beats says, will AJ be humble if he is defeated? Good question. I suspect so. I think the AJ stay humble character is so ironed in at times that we're always going to see AJ humble for the rest of his career. I think I saw him in a t-shirt the other day that says stay humble. Let's go. I've got some more questions here that have come through. Alex says, what was your scorecard at the end of the 6th round in Bellew versus Hay? Good question. Let me ask if you're watching in the chat, am I right in thinking that the knockdown was in the 5th? So I'm just trying to remember this off the top of my head. I gave the first to Bellew. I gave 2, 3, and 4 to Hay. And I'm thinking the knockdown was in the 5th. So I'm just having a look into the chat now to see if anyone watching live can confirm that to me. Our Team Groves is saying the knockdown was in the 6th. Oh, the knockdown was in the 6th. Okay. So I think, I can't remember who I scored the 5th to. I just can't remember. So I think I've either got it, if I gave the 5th to David Hay, then I would have had it Hay by a point after 6. If I gave the 5th to Tony Bellew, then I'd have had Bellew by a point. My instinct is I gave it to Hay. Team Groves knows my scorecard better than I did. Yes, I gave it to Hay. So yeah, Hay was 4-1 up leading into the 6th on my card. I gave Bellew the first, and then I gave Hay the next 4 rounds. Bellew gets the knockdown, so a 10-8 round. So effectively, I've got it 4 rounds to 2 with 1 10-8 in Bellew's favour. So approximately 4 rounds to 3, if you like. Giovanni says, why can't Lucas Brown get a fight? Well, I'm afraid to say, without giving a facetious answer, the main reason he can't get a fight is because there are 2 failed drug tests. He's made himself an unattractive proposition with that, I'm afraid. Giovanni says, how old do you have Luis Ortiz? Do you know what? I don't know. I don't think he's mega old. Some people seem to think he's like 48. I don't think he's that old, because up till relatively recently, he was still putting in very explosive, very aggressive, very eye-catching performances. But yeah, I think he's claiming to be 37, 38. Could he be a few years older than that? Definitely. Daniel says, should Anthony Joshua lose? What happens to... we've already answered that question. Balthazar, this is one we'll go to the chat with. Balthazar asks, what is your top 10 prospect from the divisions? Which prospects do you guys rate? Certainly Hughie Fury in the heavyweights. I'm a big fan of Hughie Fury. Got 100 people watching, so thanks for joining live. Please take the time to hit the thumbs up button if you're one of those 100 watching live, and let me know who your prospects are. Odd, light heavyweight prospect. Trying to think who else I really like light heavyweight prospect Tom Baker, but I understand he might have potentially given up the game. Just waiting to see if any more prospects are coming through in the chat. Certainly Hughie Fury at the minute is I guess you could say he's almost a contender now as opposed to a prospect. Same thing you could say with Errol Spence. So there we go. Right, okay. So those are the questions that I've had in and had prepared from the ones that I was asked on. Josh Taylor, Ben makes an excellent point. Josh Taylor I rate very, very highly in the light welterweight division. And I also rate I also rate Ahara Davies. Do I rate Anthony Yard? Yes, I do rate Anthony Yard. But I've seen him box live, and I'm concerned that as he steps up in level, he'll be very small for light heavyweight. He's very powerfully built, don't get me wrong. He's very stocky, very muscular, but he's really, really short. I've seen him in the flesh. He's really short for a light heavyweight. Andrew Selby is a good prospect, certainly. And I just worry as he steps up in level, he will be very susceptible to a bigger man, because Yard is a guy who likes to box. He likes to use range. He likes to use his fundamentals. And I think he may struggle to get those established to the same effect when he's up against guys who are 6, 7, 8 inches taller than him. And, you know, I think that size difference is actually realistic given his stature. Lawrence Okoli, he's certainly a celebrity prospect. I kind of think it's almost too early to say at this stage how much I rate him. Ryan Burnett, yeah, he's someone who's never really caught my imagination, I must admit. I've kind of been nonplussed by him, you know. But there we go. Right, let's go to the chat, guys. So I can see some of you have taken the time to write in questions. I'm afraid there's been far too many of them to... Nick Green says, gossip, Yard is 6 foot. He isn't, Nick. He's nowhere near 6 foot. I've stood next to him and met him. He's nothing like 6 foot. I think he's about 5'9", mate. So let's go into the chat. And yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go back to previous questions, so you may have to write them again. Will Jones says, thoughts on Smith versus Dirrell? I'll certainly do a separate video on that. I see it as a 50-50 fight. Wes says, rank the top 5 heavyweights for us. Well, let's put Fury out of the mix. I'm going to go Klitschko 1, Joshua 2, Wilder 3. We'll rule out Povetkin. Pulev and Parker, I guess, in no particular order. Wallpaper, are there any relatively unknown heavyweights who you think could be at world level in the next couple of years? Good question. Let me have a quick think on that. Wouldn't surprise me if Nathan Gorman gets to world level. Wouldn't surprise me at all. That's about it for now. That's about it for now in terms of the lesser known heavyweights. Yeah. Josh Taylor says, what does Frank Warren have to do to compete with Matchroom? I think he's got to make this BT Sports deal, you know, a huge, huge thing. I think he's got to have bills where the fights remain consistent, where there aren't dropouts, where there aren't cancellations. You know, when a bill is announced and that bill is what we see, because I think there's been too many dropouts and fights getting edited. I think he's got to put his big name fighters in big fights. You know, Terry Flanagan is a guy who's just flown under the radar because of the, you know, the real sort of unmarketable nature of the opposition he's been in with. And I think that would certainly have to change. And I think he's got to sign fighters. I think he's got to turn guys who are new starters like Daniel Dubois into huge names, because I think he's going to have to rely on growing his own talent, which he's done before. James, is Josh Warrington's career going backwards or forwards under Box Nation? Well, James, I've got to say the initial signs aren't good. He had a fight announced against Marco McCulloch, which was then didn't happen. And he is now headlining against Kiko Martinez. And I guess Kiko Martinez is a bigger name. But for me, Kiko Martinez is a guy who is not only one weight division below, but he should be 2 weight divisions below. For me, Kiko Martinez has always been a bantamweight, not a super bantamweight. And he's got no business whatsoever campaigning at featherweight. So, you know, for me, at the minute, the signs aren't looking good. And I am not clear whether that was a good move made for Josh Warrington. Will says, opinions on Jarrell Miller. Great character, big puncher, looks very durable. Stylistically an interesting fighter. You know, a guy who's going to be involved in tough fights, a guy who's going to be hard to beat. I think he's very slow. I think he's limited technically. And I think a real fleet-footed boxer who could run rings around him would potentially be his downfall. But I do think he's, a good fighter, and I certainly think he's a good character. I think he's got a lot of attributes. He's got that come forward style. He can fight on the inside. He carries a lot of power. He looks to have a chin. So there you go. Wallpaper. Could you invite Mr. Boxing Today or Hatman as a special guest on the podcast when you're a man? Before. So yeah, we'll definitely get him on again in future. As for Hatman, big fan of his stuff. I've exchanged 1 or 2 messages with him over the years, so perhaps this is something that will happen in future. To be honest, I get a lot of people asking to go on the podcast, and a lot of people with big suggestions as to people I should get on the podcast. But I'm pretty happy with the podcast panel, to be honest. I think it's a good group of guys, and I think it works really well. So I'm not necessarily looking to change a winning formula, but yeah, if we could get those guys on another occasion, that would definitely be good. Scooby-Doo, can Dave Ryan beat Gavin? You'd have to assume Gavin's going to turn up on form, because if he doesn't, his career is over. Although we've said that a few times with Frankie Gavin, and he hasn't turned up. But Dave Ryan, for me, he's a very tough man. He's a very hard man. He's a good scrapper. But if Frankie Gavin turns up in shape, and I believe this 145 catchweight will actually be better for him, then you would have to assume Frankie Gavin has the beating of Dave Ryan. Dave Ryan can cause an upset. Yeah, if Frankie Gavin is a bit over the hill, if he's not taking it seriously, if he still hasn't managed to dedicate himself to the sport and to the lifestyle, Dave Ryan is a guy who could spring the upset. But he looked like a shot fighter to me against Josh Taylor. And I think Frankie Gavin is, a real level above technically, even at Dave Ryan's best. So no, I'm going Frankie Gavin. But it's an interesting fight. It's a fight that I'll have an eye on. Wes says, did I watch WrestleMania last night? I didn't. Dean says, who wins, Brooke or Spence? Cannot decide that yet, Brooke. Dean, I've changed my mind on that several times. But one thing that I promise is that I will do a full prediction video and breakdown before the fight. Paul says, should boxers have annual medicals to renew the license? Paul, I'll be honest, it's not something I know enough about really to comment. But, having read the question out, my initial thought is yes, that would make sense. AS says, do you believe Fury will be back in May, or will that date be postponed? I think it will be postponed by months. I don't think it'll be back in May, June, July, August, September. I think he's, 5 or 6 months off fighting shape at present. I also think you've got to factor in that Huey's going to be in training camp now and probably in New Zealand, and Tyson's probably going to fly out for that. So I'm sure Tyson will be, training with Huey, but I doubt he's going to be fighting in May. I think he's, at least 60, 70 pounds off fighting weight, maybe a bit more than that, maybe more like 80 or 90 pounds off fighting weight. JG says, who will be Eubank's next fight? Well, I heard a rumour they were looking at making it against John Ryder, but the ITV are really looking for Eubank to up the level of competition, which I believe they will have to do. So I believe it will probably be like a fringe defence of his IBO, against someone like, I'm trying to think who a relevant name would be at 168. Just trying to think of wouldn't surprise me if they go for someone like Rocky Fielding if he beats John Ryder, or some sort of fringe contender without being a world-class guy. Team Groves, have you made a Liam Williams versus Liam Smith prediction? Haven't just yet. We'll be up on the channel probably either Tuesday night, tomorrow night, or Thursday night, I think. Mikey, how far can Tyrone Nurse go? I believe he can be a European champion, Mikey. I don't believe he can be a world champion. I don't think he's got the power to keep fighters off him. And I believe that whilst he is very slick, he goes through periods of fights where he gets caught and he you know, maybe allows himself to be backed up into the ropes. And I think he'll get found out at world level. But I think he's an underrated fighter, and I think he can definitely make it to European level. Ben says, are Sky taking liberties with too many pay-per-views? Do you know, my opinion on this is very, very unpopular, but it is my opinion. If people buy a chocolate bar for £1 and they keep buying that chocolate bar, and then the price goes up to £1.20, and then they keep buying the chocolate bar, and then the manufacturer reduces the size of the chocolate bar by 10%, but puts the price up to £1.50, and more people keep buying the chocolate bar, and it keeps selling more and more and more bars, then it's giving a clear message to the manufacturer that a higher price and a lesser product is working. And it's giving a clear message to the manufacturer that they should continue moving in that direction. And I'm afraid that's what's happening. You know, they have created these pay-per-views. They've created pay-per-views like Hay versus Bellew, which I personally didn't see as a real fight. I thought it was so easy for, you know, for David Hay that it wasn't a competitive fight. How wrong was I? But the fact of the matter is they're putting on these pay-per-views and they are doing an absolutely incredible amount of business. And I actually think that there's more demand for these pay-per-views than there is for the standard Saturday night bills at the present. So unfortunately, from a business perspective, are they taking liberties? No. They're a company who's looking to make a profit. The demand is massively there, and they've got the supply. So that's my perspective. You know, if it's just a supply and demand as it is with any other business. Do I like it? No. Would I be doing it if I was Sky? Hell yeah. Paul, will Frank Warren succeed with pay-per-view? I think it's all going to depend on the fighters. I think they need... It's the same for them, really, because I think if Tyson Fury Klitschko rematch had gone ahead, that would have been a huge launch for Box Nation pay-per-view. And I think the size of the fight and the scale of the fight would have been so large that it would have done good numbers and that it would have put them on a pedestal. They're going to have to do mega fights, and it's probably going to have to involve the Furies, because even their big names like Billy Joe Saunders and Josh Warrington and Terry Flanagan, for me, these guys don't have the profile just yet to headline pay-per-views. I think the only one who does is probably Tyson Fury. And I believe the risk with them doing pay-per-views is, we know the Eddie Hearn numbers are so strong, it could actually be fairly humiliating. You know, if they did a pay-per-view with Terry Flanagan and it sold 10,000 or 20,000, you know, the lack of numbers would, you know, really be a blow and would potentially affect them from signing fighters, because the fighters would look at Hearn's numbers and think, you know, how much higher the numbers are with Hearn as opposed to Warren. So I think they need a truly mega fight. You know, a returning Tyson Fury certainly is the man with the profile and the presence to launch it. If Saunders fought Golovkin, that would be another one. But, you know, I think the fact that Saunders has never been on Sky and never been on terrestrial TV. I know Billy Joe's a huge name to us. I know he does very, very big numbers on like AFL TV and that sort of thing. But I still don't think if Billy Joe Saunders walked into a pub, as much people would know him as Chris Eubank Jr. And that's a shame, given that he beat Chris Eubank Jr. But it is what it is. Will says, does BJS have any chance against Golovkin? He does have a chance. He's a very good fighter. He's a slick southpaw. He can move. He's got great reactions. He's got a speed advantage over Golovkin. He's younger than Golovkin, and Golovkin may have lost a step. Do I pick him against Golovkin? Absolutely not. No, Golovkin's a strong favourite. Does he have a chance? Yeah, he's got a chance. I do believe he could have some of the same success Danny Jacobs had, possibly to a greater extent. I believe Saunders may be a better pure boxer than Jacobs. But would Saunders have the power to keep Golovkin honest, like Jacobs did? Would Saunders have the size to keep Golovkin off him, like Jacobs did? And would Saunders have the stamina to fight like Jacobs did? I'm unsure. So I really do pick, you know, Golovkin in that fight. But the longer it goes on, the more and more old Golovkin's getting, and you know, I wouldn't necessarily rule that out. So, yeah, he's a live underdog, but Golovkin's a strong favourite. 120 people watching now, so thanks to everyone who's joined. We're doing an any questions answered format. If you are watching live, hit the thumbs up button, please. Truth Hurts says, do you think Steve Bunce is a wanker? I've always liked Steve Bunce, actually. I think he's an entertaining guy. He's not the slickest presenter. He's not, you know, the most eloquent. He's not the most presentable, which I guess is the job of a presenter. You know, and I guess him being the lead for Box Nation is kind of giving him an image as a, you know, a kind of bargain bin operation. He's not very slick. But yeah, I like Steve Bunce. He's maybe more, you know, he's maybe more the guy to lead a small horse show at your call, as opposed to being the face of a channel, genuinely looking to do, you know, pay-per-view and that sort of thing. Zaid says, who do you think Dillian's headlining against June the 3rd? I was thinking about this. That's a tough one because O2 is a big arena, and I don't think Dillian Whyte exactly has hordes of fans who are going to buy tickets. So it's got to be a relatively decent fight, or else I think it'll be empty. Brian Jennings, that's an option. Dominic Breazeale, that's an option. David Price, you know, I know people laugh at that, but Price, you know, domestic heavyweight classes sell. Definitely. So that's potentially an option. The honest answer, though, is I don't actually know. I think that's a very difficult question to answer. And I was a bit miffed by the announcement myself, because I think there's potential for that to flop as a bill. Because I just don't think, I know Dillian Whyte's a big name, but he's very much, you know, I'm just not sure I see him yet as having a fan base to sell out the O2 Arena on his own. Let's have a look. Midnight says, what happened to Prince Patel? He's gone quiet. He's gone very quiet. I don't know what's going on with him at present, I must admit. DJ Slick says, does Chisora rematch happen with White? Well, Chisora's now got a fight against Robert Helenius, and that's a fight that he could easily lose. And obviously, if he loses it, the fight definitely won't happen. But yeah, I think the fight is there. The question is, if Chisora's taken that other match, and you know, then we'll want a few months to recover afterwards. And White's fighting in June the 3rd. Who knows what matchup that White will get next, and who knows what he'll get off the back of that? Could he be closer to a world title fight? You know, what I'm getting at is, could Dillian Whyte potentially move beyond Chisora over the course of his next fight or two? And I think it's possible that will happen. Craig says he's pissed off about my comments regarding Golovkin and his opposition's record. You don't understand the pads of records. You don't understand the pads of records, but more importantly, travel costs and valid opposition in developing countries. Well, my point on Roman Gonzalez, and I won't go into this in too much depth because, as Craig's mentioned, I've covered that fairly extensively in a separate video. But my point regarding Roman Gonzalez is not that he's a terrible fighter. It's not that he's not a world-level fighter. The issue is twofold. Number one, I don't think he could be considered pound for pound number one, given the level of opposition. That's not his fault. It's a fact. And number two, I thought his performance against Rungvisai was very, very dubious for a pound for pound level one fighter. I thought he showed a real lack of well-roundedness and versatility. So that's my points in a nutshell on that one. But as I said throughout that video, and you know, various people got completely the wrong end of the stick. They must have only listened to half of it. Good fighter. It's just, is he a pound for pound number one? And the answer to that is no. Dean says, BG, what do you make of Daniel Kinahan? Haven't seen him. Truth Hurts says, BG, pound for pound, who do you think is the best chin in boxing? Good question. Good question. Pound for pound #1 chin. I'm going to miss someone really obvious here, aren't I? Let's go to the chat on that. Who is the best chin in boxing? Someone said David Allen. Someone said Golovkin. Wes says Bernard Hopkins. Yeah. Certainly give a shout out to all of them. Danny Garcia's got a very good chin. That's a great shout, Craig. Yeah, I'm gonna go Danny Garcia. I'm gonna go Danny Garcia. Mr. Boxing Today says BJ Nick Webb versus Gorman, who you've got. Mr. Boxing Today, I've got Gorman easy in that fight. Easy. I think Nick Webb is a Southern area level fighter. I think Gorman will go on to be a really, really good fighter. Jamie, good shout, Jamie. Marius Walk is the answer for pound best chin. Yeah, I'll go with Marius Walk #1. I'll go with Danny Garcia #2. There you go. Wes says Gorman, Webb, Turner, best prospect. Gorman's on a different level to those guys. You know, I don't see the other two making it to British level, maybe not even English level. Gorman is a real talent. Gorman's only 20 years old. Martin says, what do you think of Charlie Zelenoff? I think he's a very, very bizarre man. A very bizarre man. Yeah, and I certainly didn't like his behaviour with Floyd Mayweather Sr. That was pretty disgusting, actually. Jamie says, what 2016 Olympian are you most excited about in the pros? Well, I guess Buatsi and Joe Joyce are the two most hyped ones, and we haven't seen them turn over yet. Tony Yoka as well. You know, let's not forget he actually beat Joe Joyce. I know that was controversial, but yeah, I'd like to see Tony Yoka. Craig says, you watching much of the World League of Boxing? I'm not sold on it. I haven't watched any of it, Craig, to be honest. Ben says, can Usyk move up to heavyweight and win a world title? Usyk's a very good fighter. Could he move up to heavyweight and win a world title? Potentially. But I don't believe he could be the #1 heavyweight in the context of the sport currently. Yeah, Usyk, for me, is a guy who would be very, very small at heavyweight. And his style is a style that, for me, relies on being a boxer mover. He's an outside fighter. He's a guy who likes to jab. He's a guy who likes to get clean work off from range. And he's very, very good at that. But he's very good at that in a division where the weight is capped at 200 pounds and where the guys are the same size as him or maybe even slightly smaller. Up at heavyweight, when you're going up against guys who would have a substantial size, reach, range advantage over you, I don't think it would be as easy for Usyk. And I think he would struggle up at heavyweight against the real big guys. You know, if guys like Tyson Fury, Wilder, Joshua, Klitschko, I kind of believe those guys have just too much of a size advantage over Alexander Usyk for me to pick Usyk above those guys. But yeah, could Usyk win a versatile world title? Yes, he's a pure talent. Dean says, what about Leon Woodstock? I've seen Leon Woodstock several times. I've watched him box in the flesh. I've been ringside for one of his fights. Very good fighter, very entertaining fighter. Reminds me a lot, and I'm sure this has been said before because the comparison is so obvious, but he reminds me a lot of Chris Eubank Jr. I think he's a tad guilty at the minute of admiring his work. I think he's a tad guilty of looking for, you know, the most eye-catching, beautiful haymaker, as opposed to really setting himself and, you know, sticking to his fundamentals. But he's an athlete. He puts punches together fantastically well. He's really entertaining to watch. He's got a lot of in-ring charisma. And he's someone who I think Frank Warren should really look to build. He's the kind of guy I'd be having on the undercards of big bills. He's the kind of guy I'd be putting in 4 and 6 rounders before the main event. You know, you look at those Frank Warren prospects, there's been guys before that I'd have really promoted, really marketable guys who I don't think Frank's done the best job on. You know, guys like Romeo, guys like Prince Patel. These may not be the best fighters in the world, But these are guys who are marketable guys who kind of faded into oblivion. And I genuinely believe that Leon Woodstock is a guy who could capture people's imagination the way he fights. I'm a fan of his. Wherever he's got the power, whether he's got the technique to make it at the top level, we shall see. We won't know till he steps up in levels. But he's a very, very, very good fighter. Let's have a look back into the chat. Right. Joseph Parker wouldn't be making cruiserweight for my money. Lee says, do you think Joshua will unify the heavyweight division this year? I don't know. If I'm honest, at this point, I'm picking Klitschko to beat Joshua. So that would be the first reason that I don't believe he'll win it. And even if he does go and beat Klitschko, which I acknowledge he may well do, it's going to be very, very hard to unify this year because, you know, if he beats Klitschko in April, his next fight will be, what, July, August? The fight after that will be November, December. He's not going to take the Parker Huey Fury winner and the Wilder back to back, is he? So I don't believe that's going to happen. B Hates Boy says, what's your view on Eddie Hearn's role in world boxing? Do you think he's been good for the game overall? Yeah, I do. People think I'm an Eddie Hearn fanboy. People don't like the fact that I like Eddie Hearn, but it's my opinion. I do think so. I think he's taken the sport of boxing to a new level in the UK. You know, if you look at where boxing was at pre-Eddie Hearn, I don't think it was in as good a place. And I think the work he's done with Carl Frotz, the work he's done with Anthony Joshua, has created boxing superstars that we actually haven't had for a few years in this country. And more people are talking about boxing. More and more people are, you know, wanting to go to fights, are wanting to buy pay-per-views, are wanting to support the sport. So on the whole, I think it's a positive thing. Although I know it's a controversial subject, and a lot of the, you know, I know it's fashionable to hate on Eddie Hearn, and a lot of the boxing hardcore are against him. But yeah, that's my perspective. Curtis says, any word on the Eubank pay-per-view numbers? I've heard rumours anywhere from 60 through to 80,000, but no confirmation. Martin, Murray versus Rosado, who wins? Slightly into Murray at this stage. I will certainly do a full prediction video. Wes says, how does AJ versus Wlad play out? Probably a tentative early start followed by a knockout in the mid-rounds, I would guess. Jake says, Beefy versus Williams, who wins? He's picking Williams by early KO. Video to come on that this week. Very good fight. Jamie says, do you think Nathan Gorman beats the likes of Allen, Cornish, Sexton, Lewison right now? I think if he fought them right now, I'd make him a favourite, but not a wide favourite. I think if he has 2 or 3 more fights at the lower level, I'd make him, you know, a level above those sort of guys. Truth Hurts, BG, do you think AJ versus Wlad could be incredibly cagey and potentially a boring fight compared to how it should have played out? I think there's a high probability of that. I think Wlad is a cagey fighter, and I think Joshua is probably going to have much more respect for Wlad than he has with other opponents, given the size and power of Wlad and the jab as well. Joshua's never going to have faced someone with the technical ability of Wlad, with the jab of Wlad, with the power of Wlad. So, yeah, I suspect it could be a very, very cagey opening. I think that after a nervous start, both guys will look to engage. And I think with such big punches in the ring and potentially 2 frail chins, there will be a knockout. Thoughts on Daniel Dubois? Haven't seen too much of him. We'll wait till he turns over, but I'm hearing very, very good things. Curtis says, what's Eubank's next move? Well, we kind of discussed that earlier on. But yeah, it's a, you know, I suspect that he'll stay on ITV pay-per-view and defend his IBO super middleweight strap. Lee has just come across the channel. Good stuff. Thank you very much for tuning in, Lee. Please hit the subscribe button. Box King, who do you rate higher, Luke Campbell or Ahara Davies? Wow, good question. Good question. Slight edge to Luke Campbell, but I'll rate them both very, very highly. Big fan of both of them. It's a tough one, that. I think at the minute I have Luke Campbell a bit ahead of Ahara Davies, but I think they're both potential world champions. Dan, do you think AJ should go out and jump on Wlad? It's difficult, that. I think AJ should look to close the reins actually quite early, because I don't think he wants to get in a jabbing contest with Wlad. So I think if they get in a jabbing contest, then Vladimir will beat AJ quite comfortably. So I do think AJ should look to close down the gap and, you know, try and get inside the pocket and fight at that 3/4 range. He's so effective quite early on. Yeah, he's got to be tentative. He doesn't want to get clipped with anything. Truth hurts. BG, what's the first boxing you saw that made you fall in love with the sport? 2 words: Joe Calzaghe. Joe Calzaghe was a huge, huge thing for me in my household growing up. Huge fan of Joe Calzaghe, and you know, I got into boxing. I used to love, when I was growing up, I used to love the Audley Harrison, Sprott, Danny Williams, that kind of trilogy with those 3 guys. The Contender series, some of you guys will remember the Contender, a few different things, but Joe Calzaghe was the main man for me. Punk Pop says, how far can Dave Allen go? I believe he can win a British title. There's a kind of gap in the sport at the minute where you've got guys like Chisora and White who are kind of above and beyond British title level, and you've got fighters like Sexton and Cornish, you know, operating at British title. And I believe if Dave Allen, you know, gets in with one of those guys on the right night, he does have the talent to win a world title. Sorry, to win a British title. Jamie, so speaking of Calzaghe, what do you think of Kessler returning? Good or bad? I think on the whole, you know, it's probably not a good thing. He's a guy whose legacy was secure. He's a great fighter. He's made a lot of money. I did do a video on Frotz Kessler 3, so do check that out. But it's interesting, you know, it was not my advice to Kessler if I was giving him personal advice, but, you know, as a fan, would I watch Kessler return? Absolutely. He's been inactive for a long time, though, and he's had a lot of wars. Maybe he doesn't have a kind of style that will age well. So, you know, I just hope that when his career is over for the second time, he's still got his health and, you know, it doesn't do any damage to come back. Adam, BG, you will never see Spencer Evans again after this fight, after he beats Kell Brook. If he beats Kell Brook, I suspect you're right, Adam. PPS, who would have won between Calzaghe and Andre Ward if they fought each other? Do you know what? I've struggled with that question so many times, and I've changed my opinion so many times, you know. Calzaghe, he definitely have the volume advantage. Ward, he definitely have the technique advantage. I'm one of the biggest Calzaghe fans there are, but Calzaghe was a beatable fighter. He never lost, but he was a beatable fighter. We saw him in close fights time and time again. We've seen Andre Ward in close fights. You know, people said Hopkins beat Calzaghe. Some people say Kovalev beat Ward. Right now, and I've changed my mind on this several times, and I reserve the right to change my mind again, but right now, if you put a gun to my head, I'm going to go with Andre Ward. I just kind of feel Andre Ward has this air of invincibility about him. I believe he's such an adaptable fighter that he's the kind of guy who can bring something different to each opponent. So I'll go with Andre Ward, but that is it hurts me to say that. Dean says Taylor versus Ahara, Josh Taylor versus Davis. Who wins, and is that an ex-British boxing fight? The next big British boxing fight. Well, I don't actually believe it's a massive fight if it happens now. And for that reason, I don't think it will happen, because I don't think either guys have a massive profile. And I suspect that next, I don't suspect it's a massive fight that really carries over to the casual fan. I think they're both live in the fight. You know, I think Ahara Davis is a very, very good prospect, but I would give a slight edge to Josh Taylor right now. I think Taylor hits harder. I think he's bigger. And I'd give a slight edge to Josh Taylor. But it's a tough fight. I'd probably go 60-40 Taylor. I know some people will go something like 99-1. Um, let's have a look. I'm gonna have to shoot off soon, people. So I'll just go and look at. I'll just have another 2 or 3 questions in the chat, and then we'll have to wrap it up and call it a night. Craig, has Luis Ortiz got shot overnight, or his 44 years catching up with him? I don't think he's got shot overnight, actually. I think if you look at Luis Ortiz, you can actually see a fairly gradual decline in Ortiz. I mean, he slowly but surely got worse. I think some of the early signs were actually there in the Bryant Jennings fight. I actually thought at the time of the stoppage, Bryant Jennings was coming into that fight, but Luis Ortiz's power got him through it. And I think the decline was becoming more obvious against Malik Scott and even more obvious against Dave Allen. So, you know, I suspect we're seeing a gradual decline. Jamie says, good show. Thanks, Jamie. Craig says, good Q&A, mate. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, Craig. Appreciate it. Will says, Ortiz v. Joshua winner. At present, I'd go Joshua. I really think Ortiz is coming to the tail end of his career, and I actually think he'd be very small against a guy like Joshua. Ortiz is not as big a heavyweight as you'd think. Truth Hurts is another good stream, BG. Enjoy the rest of your night, mate. Peace. Thanks, Truth Hurts. Ben says, love the new format. Try and do this again. Well, you know, if it's popular, if people like it, maybe we could try and make this a regular Monday night thing. Maybe we could do this as a Monday slot. We'll see. The best way of finding out is follow me on Twitter at Boxing Gossip and add me on Facebook. There's a link in the description below, and I'll always tweet it out when I'm going live so you guys can join in. Wes says, Wilder Joshua. At this point, I'm going Joshua. I just think Wilder's so defensively open. I think Joshua's got better timing and better accuracy. I think Joshua would clip him, but it's a very dangerous fight. And if Wilder landed first, he could definitely get the win. Jay says, Ahura Davies would beat Taylor in his opinion. Adam says, well done, BG. Scooby-Doo says, is Roach good for Quigg? Well, you kind of think of Freddie Roach as that kind of brawling style, don't you? You know, that kind of fast and furious style. And, yeah, maybe Quigg needs someone to give him a bit more boxing education. But, yeah, to be honest, I've got to give fair play to Scott Quigg. You know, he's a lad from Bury, and he's, you know, he was in a comfort zone, and he's taken a loss, and he's decided to step out of that and challenge himself. So I give a lot of credit. Wes says, Joshua versus Pulev. Joshua for me. Pulev is a guy who, his career has really stagnated. The level of opposition, I mean, Kevin Johnson next is a poor fight. And I think Pulev's a very good fighter, but he was very unconvincing when he stepped up in levels to fight Vladimir Klitschko. Anyway, guys, I think that will do me. It was meant to be a 20, 30-minute one, and we've got on for nearly 70 minutes, and we've had up to about 140 people joining. So, yeah, massively appreciate this. Perhaps we'll bring back Ask BG Anything number 2 in a week's time. Let's see. If you've enjoyed this, please take the time to hit the thumbs up button. Whether you're watching live now or whether you're watching at a later date after this has been uploaded to the channel, do hit the subscribe button. Would appreciate that. Cheers, Wes. Do hit the subscribe button. We're looking to continue building things out and growing the channel. So the more people who subscribe, the more people who click the thumbs up button, that massively helps. Thanks to everyone also who shared the link on Twitter and on Facebook. Cheers, Adam. Cheers, Lee. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll call it a night there. But we'll be back later this week. We're going to have a breakdown of Petrov, Flanagan. We're going to have a breakdown of Liam Smith, Liam Williams. And we're going to do the podcast this Wednesday live on the channel. Every Wednesday at 8:30, podcast goes live. So there we are. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Hope everyone has a good evening. And drop your comments in the section below. Hit the thumbs up button, subscribe. And cheers for tuning in, everyone.